2017, he served at the FCC as the Deputy Director of the Commission's Office of Legislative Affairs. And this capped a 2.5-year period where he served as legal aid to the Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and as an attorney advisor to the Wireline Competition Bureau. While in the Wireline Competition Bureau, he was part of the team that modernized ERate, and which is the government's largest educational technology program. I saw Sean present at National Congress of American Indians in October, and he's got this down. He's got a great presentation, so get your pens out and take some notes. All right, welcome.
All right, thanks for coming. Very much. Thank you. And thanks for Gila River Telecom, NTTA, and AIPI for putting this event on, because this really is a great opportunity for Indian country. And I think as much as we can get the word out about this, the better off we'll be. In terms of my background, really quick, so when I was a baby lawyer, one of my first clients was Gila River Telecom. And I worked with Brian Howard and Belinda and some of the other folks who have been working on these issues for a long time, and that was in the wireline context. I eventually went to the FCC. When I worked on the ERate program, actually, one of the first meetings I had was with Dana Schaefer, as she was
sorry about that.
She was really running the show on modernizing the ERate program, which is really was a phenomenal achievement, I think, for the commission and for Dana and for everyone. But I also worked a little bit on the 2.5 gigahertz band when I was in the Wireless Bureau, and this was a rulemaking that took a long time to get to final rules. And I think it presents now, the way the commission did it, I think, it was a really positive development for Indian country. So what I'm going to do here is walk through, I think, some of the most common questions that folks are having about this opportunity. And I'm going to sort of point out some of the sticky issues that you might come across and how I might advise an applicant to address some of these issues as someone who had worked at the FCC and now someone who's advising clients. Before I jump into it, I just want to talk a little bit about my firm's role here. So I'm an attorney at a firm called Wilkinson Barker & Auer in Washington, D.C. We do some work for some tribally owned broadband companies, but our big role in this window is going to be helping one of our pro bono clients, MuralNet, who's doing phenomenal work, and Marielle's going to be speaking after me, and we're going to be advising MuralNet on the back end as they consult with tribes and other eligible entities who are interested in filing their applications to participate in this process. For a variety of reasons, it was a little challenging for us, me and an attorney I work with, to get our general counsel to sign off on the potential of taking in potentially dozens or hundreds of new pro bono clients. So the way we're going to kind of lend assistance to this effort here is through sort of back-end support with MuralNet and the great work that Marielle's doing. So let's jump into the presentation, and feel free, for those of you here live in the audience, to ask questions as we go. Some of these issues were already covered. Some of these issues Dana teed up, and I scrambled and made some last-minute revisions over the last hour to address them. But I'm hoping that I can add some value here to what some of the other great presenters have already talked about. So we're going to look at what geographic areas are eligible, how much spectrum is eligible, which tribal entities are eligible to apply, so who's an eligible applicant, what happens if mutually exclusive applications are filed, and I have some ideas on how to avoid that. What performance requirements apply to these licenses? Can a licensee lease or sell a license after it is awarded? And then finally, I'm going to take a really high-level look at how one might finance a network construction and operation once you do obtain one of these licenses. So on the first point here, what geographic areas are eligible? This has been covered by some of the previous presenters, but there's really sort of three components. You have to be a qualifying tribal land, you have to meet the FCC's definition of rural, and there has to be spectrum available, so unlicensed spectrum available for you to license here in this band. So here's the FCC's definition of tribal land. If you are looking to obtain a license for what would be off-reservation land, the order that the FCC released did state that it would that such a process would have to go through a waiver request, and I'll talk about that in a second. You have to meet the FCC's definition of rural, which is right up here, and there has to be spectrum available. And as Dana presented, the commission has done a great job at making these mapping resources available to interested applicants to really identify what those geographic barriers are to determine eligibility for a tribal land, whether that tribal land meets the rural definition, and whether there is spectrum available. So I would encourage folks to take advantage of that resource that the FCC worked really hard to put together. Now, I'm going to have a couple bonus questions here throughout the presentation to keep you all on your toes. The first one is, so what if I have a checkerboard geography, which we've already talked about, or another way to put it is non-contiguous tribal lands, and you're interested in licensing spectrum on these non-tribal lands. So one option for you is this waiver request that we've talked about before. So, and this is key, and I can't stress this enough. You want to file your waiver request during the application window. So it doesn't necessarily need to be most likely with your application, but it has to be during the application window because
Actually, it doesn't have to be with the application, but we're making it easy. You have to tell us when you apply that you're seeking a waiver. Actually, it does have to be with the application because that's how we're streamlining the process. So there will be a screen that says, are you asking for a waiver? And if you say yes, then when you get to your attachment, you upload it. So it does need to be, sorry.
That's all right. I haven't even seen the application yet, so I got lucky, I guess.
It normally does not have to be together, but we're streamlining the process, so it will be with the application.
And the reason I put in during the application window is, as we all know, after this application window closes, at some point the FCC is going to auction this spectrum. So the opportunity with respect to this band will be lost potentially if you don't file that waiver request during the application window. So what's the waiver standard? The waiver standard is good cause, and the FCC has defined good cause in sort of two components. One is it has to be in the public interest, and two, it has to not undermine the underlying purpose of the rule. So depending on the facts of your waiver request, you will want to make this public interest case and then describe why. And it may be that from a technical perspective, it will be almost impossible to carve out the non-tribal land near your geographic boundary. It may be, from a technical perspective, it would be almost impossible for another licensee to serve that area. So it'll be very fact specific, and you would have to look at that as the facts present themselves. But the waiver is not the only way that one could serve off-reservation land. There are three other ways to do it, at least three other ways. One is you could go and purchase the license. You could purchase the license for the off-reservation lands through the FCC's auction that they're going to have after this application window. Another way to serve those areas would be through a leasing arrangement. So if another entity comes in and purchases a lease for that adjacent geographical area, you might be able to carve out a portion of that geographic area and lease it from that other entity. And then a fourth way is something that Dana had alluded to earlier in her presentation. So the rules for this band are very interesting in that they allow a licensee to sort of bleed into adjacent areas that are outside of the license area, as long as you're not causing interference to another licensee. So if there is an area that's adjacent to your license area and you know that someone else is not operating there, you may be able to provide some minimal coverage and bleed into that area to provide service to those folks who are living there. So let's go to question 2, which is how much spectrum is available. And I'm glad Godfrey's here because I'm going to use Maddie as an example here. So what I have up on the screen here are the old licensing rules and and the new channel rules for this band. So in green, A, B, C, D, those are the old licenses. These are the old channel rules for this band. So the band right now is broken up into channel A, channel B block, channel C block, channel D block, channel G block. And you could ignore the BRS for the time being. What the FCC has said is we're going to expand the size of these blocks. So under the new channel rules, you're going to have, instead of these smaller blocks, you're going to have one channel that's 49.5 megahertz wide, you're going to have another channel that's 50.5 megahertz wide, and then a third channel that's going to be 16.5 megahertz wide. And what you're going to get is an overlay license. So so to the extent there are any existing licensees, so if there was an existing licensee that had a license for channel block A, then you would get an overlay license that would allow you to operate in the remainder of that channel. So in what is currently channel B, channel C, channel D. And here's my Maddie example. So this is an example of the coverage over Mescalero Apache Reservation right now. And what you're seeing is there's one licensee who has one channel block that's currently licensed over Mescalero Apache. But they don't cover the entire reservation. There's still this part over here that is completely unlicensed. So what you would look at if you are Mescalero Apache is the fact that on the far left side, that channel is currently licensed, so you have to not interfere with that current licensee. However, there's now this big, wide swath of spectrum right next to it that's available for you. So to the extent that Mescalero Apache decides that they're going to apply for a license, they would have the ability then to operate in this big, wide swath of spectrum. They would have to respect the current licensee again here in this 6 megahertz block of spectrum that the current licensee has already licensed. Mescalero Apache would have another block here, and then finally they would have a third block over here. So any questions about this? This gets a little complicated.
Don't forget the 1 megahertz.
The 1 megahertz, that's right. I'm sorry, we couldn't manipulate this.
Okay.
So, do you want to?
You still do, channel group 3 has 1 little megahertz over here. In the blue. In the blue. It may be important someday, so 1 little megahertz. Mary, you're going to find use for that 1 megahertz, right?
We already have one.
Oh, okay.
Not technical yet, but give us a couple years on the tech side, but definitely when it comes to making computers blocks.
So, and just to go back to make sure everyone understands. So for this portion of Mescalero Apache right now, all of the channels are available. There's no encumbrance right now. But for this area that's in the darker yellow, you have some licensed channels already. So to the extent that Mescalero Apache decides to apply, they would have to accommodate those current encumbrances.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but in the application process, since there is something available in each of the 3 channel groups, to make it easy, you're just going to check 1, 2, and 3. You won't get all of 1, 2, or 3 because somebody's already there, but you'll get something, you'll get what's available in 1, 2, or 3 if your license is approved and you're the only one that applied and it's not mutually exclusive, but
yeah.
You would check all 3.
I think I get 16 and a half is being used, channel 2 is 7 is being used.
That's right.
So you wouldn't get those, but you'd have an overlay
Yeah.
license, so if those folks ever went away, you'd get that.
Those ones, but I can use what's available, which could be 94.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and your license, when you get your license, it will tell you
Yeah.
what you're authorized to use.
Right.
Okay. So question 3, what tribal entities are eligible to apply? So the FCC, in their order, they identified 3 types of entities that are available. So federally recognized Indian tribes, Alaska Native villages on rural tribal lands, communications providers, and other entities that provide communications and other services, provided they are owned and controlled by federally recognized tribes or a consortium of such tribes. And then the third group was tribal colleges and universities, again, that are owned and controlled by federally recognized tribes or a consortium of such tribes. Now, Dana, again, focused on this. So there's these are the entities that would be eligible to apply. Each of these entities would also have to meet the local presence requirement. And that local presence requirement, as Dana indicated, is going to be fact specific. But what it's geared towards doing, I believe, is it's geared towards preventing, one eligible tribe from claiming the spectrum on other areas in other tribal lands and other areas of the country.
Question. But you could have a coalition of tribes apply for.
Exactly.
Whatever.
Exactly. Yes. And that's number 3 right here is a consortium of such tribes. So consortiums certainly work. Consortiums work under. Now you'd have to look at the details in terms of what the local presence is, how the consortium is set up. But consortiums certainly on their face are eligible.
You'd have to show though, like if you had a consortium of 5 tribes and you're applying, I guess you could, the consortium could apply for 1 license and upload the 5 different shapefiles, but you're going to have to show your local presence in each of, like,
Sure.
5 tribes over here couldn't get together and apply for 5 shapefiles of the 5 other tribes. It's their shapefiles, their land, and they would show their local presence in each of those areas.
And everybody has to be right. You can't have an outside entity.
And every member of the consortium has to be eligible. You can't come in with a consortium of tribes and non-tribes. That won't
But you
work.
could have a consortium of 5 tribes, only an entity that files either 1 license on behalf of all 5 tribes or files 5 different licenses for each of the tribes.
As long as all 5
Or
are eligible entities in their own right.
right.
There doesn't need to be any kind of tribal resolution from each of the 5 tribes authorizing you to do that.
Again, it's fact specific. You're going to have to upload the documentation showing that, for example, if it's a coalition of 4 tribes, you're going to have some sort of agreement that you agree that the coalition owns the spectrum, not the 4 tribes. Or the 4 tribes can each apply for their spectrum and form a coalition to build a network. That's different. You have to decide though, is it a coalition applying for the spectrum, or is each tribe going to apply for the spectrum and it's a coalition to then work together to serve your area? Those are 2 different things. But you're going to have to file something showing the coalition exists, there is an agreement, they're authorized to act. So that may be different depending on, I don't know what your tribal requirements are. It might be a resolution.
But if there's 2 entities, like a tribe and a coalition that are applying for the same license, doesn't it kick them both out?
If a coalition of entities and a tribe
Are going
apply for the same spectrum, that's mutual exclusivity, and that's a problem.
So I'm going to get to that.
It could happen.
I'm going to get to that.
But Sean's going to make sure it doesn't for all his clients, right, Sean?
We're going to do our best. And here we go. Perfect segue. What if mutually exclusive applications are filed? So, as has been discussed, if there are mutually exclusive applications, which are an application looking to license the same frequencies over the 2 or more applications that are looking to license the same frequencies in the same geographic area, that would be mutually exclusive applications. So how can we avoid that? The Commission's order urges potential applicants to work together to avoid mutually exclusive applications, but when parties are talking with one another and thinking through how they might avoid the filing of mutually exclusive applications, here are sort of 3 ideas that we've had here to do this. So one would be you form a joint venture. So assuming that all of the entities are standing alone, eligible to apply for the license, you could form a joint venture and obtain and file for the license that way. Another way would be to partition the license area. So geographically split the license area. So if there's one applicant who's interested in the eastern part of an eligible tribal land and another applicant that's interested in the western part of the tribal land, then perhaps you could geographically split the license area to ensure there's no geographic mutually exclusivity. And then the third idea is you can disaggregate the spectrum. So I'll just go back to our band plan really quickly. So if there are 2 or 3 entities who are applying for the spectrum, what you could do is one entity could apply for the first block, the second entity could apply for the second block, and the third entity could apply for the third block. An imperfect solution, depending on the facts, but certainly a way to avoid mutual exclusivity. Now, these are all great ideas, but of course, because I thought of them, so I'm going to call them great ideas. But what if they don't work, right? But what if they don't work? So there's one other idea here, and this is a legal term, what we're calling kick the can down the road. So the idea is you establish a consortium as the applicant. Again, all of the entities that have an interest in the consortium are eligible on their own. You apply for the license under the consortium's name. All of the entities have an interest in this consortium, and you make clear in the documents that form the consortium that ultimate control of the consortium is going to be resolved at a later date. So, and I have an answer for you on that one. I know where you're going here.
Owned and controlled, how does that work?
So it's going to be a fact-specific situation again. So say there are 2 entities that can agree on who is going to be the license holder. Those 2 entities could form a consortium. They would both have an interest in that consortium, a 50-50 split. They apply, they get the license, and they make clear that there's going to be some other resolution process that's going to determine who ultimately owns the consortium. Maybe that resolution process plays out 6 months later, maybe it plays out a year later, and at that point, because you have papered the consortium properly with the formation documents, that entity, one entity would win out, and they would take control of the licensee.
I think it's going to be dependent on,
it's an imperfect solution.
I think it'll depend on what those documents say, what happens, because we have to know that the applicant is owned and controlled by an eligible entity, and it can't be, it's owned and controlled by one of these entities, we don't know who. So yeah, it would be fact specific, but it's an interesting proposition.
And the way you would do it, I think, is both entities initially, and this is in the weeds, this isn't going to be an issue for most people.
One question, I'm sorry, if in your example with 2 eligible entities, you might have a problem with, if the formation document said at some point we'll work it out and one of us is going to control, then my question is, let's say it's my tribe and your tribe, we don't know who's going to control a later date. I don't know how we show that the applicant, whoever's going to end up with it, has local presence. Like, you don't have local presence in my area. We'd have to have some agreement there too.
This is assuming that all of the applicants have local presence for the license area.
Oh, okay, so you're talking about like intra-council entities.
That's right.
Perfect, okay.
That's right.
I like the way you're thinking.
It's an imperfect solution, but it's a way to avoid mutual exclusivity and an auction. Because I think ultimately, it's in everyone's interest to avoid the auction.
So you mean like if the tribal government and the school district, or the tribal telecom for that reservation and the tribal, like they're all within the same family, if you will, they just say, look, one of us is going to end up being the lead, but we just need to get together to get the spectrum now.
So yeah, so an example could be, and again, this isn't going to be a problem for most applicants, but an example could be if there is a tribal resolution process to determine who ultimately should own this license, but that resolution process won't conclude until after the window is open. And so this is a way to kick the can down the road to at least obtain the license and then address the proper ownership of that licensee pursuant to the tribal resolution process or any other process that might be.
I just call it kick our own can. It has to be your own can. Okay.
And again, you know, the ultimate thinking here is that this is an asset that's being made available for free. So to the extent all interested parties can avoid having this asset go to auction where now suddenly you're going to have to pay for it, is the goal.
I have a question in regards to there's two neighboring tribes, and one tribe decides that they're not interested in this, and say the other tribe says, okay, you know what, if you're not going to use that, do you want us to provide coverage of that particular area? Is that something like a legal problem?
So in that instance, I would recommend for those two tribes to form a consortium, because let's say you have a north tribe and a south tribe, and the northern tribe says, we're not interested in pursuing a license, but if the southern tribe can obtain this license, we would be fine with them providing service in the northern tribe's boundaries. So what I would argue is the southern tribe doesn't fulfill then that local presence requirement. So what I would do is I would set up a consortium between the two tribes that then fulfills your local presence requirement, and then that southern tribe could provide service within the northern tribe boundaries.
But the northern tribe would still be a member of the licensee entity.
That's right.
They just sort of delegate the hard build out, the service part to the other tribe.
That's right. That's right.
Keep in mind that they're still responsible for the build out requirement. So if for some reason the other tribe doesn't get it done, you can lose, you
Right.
can lose your license.
And I have a slide on that coming up.
Oh, you must have worked with some really good people in the past.
great mentors along the way. So what are the performance requirements that apply to these licenses? This has been discussed earlier, but so there's two types of performance requirements. If you're going to construct a mobile point-to-point or broadcast service, you have an interim benchmark that's 50% population coverage, and then a final benchmark, which is 80% population coverage. Most likely, the easier way to fulfill your build-out requirement will be through a point-to-point operation. And here, as Dana had discussed earlier in her presentation, the interim benchmark equates to really only one wireless link for 50,000 people. As we've discussed, 50,000 people is a really large number. In most cases, if you build one link, you will most likely not have 25,000 people within the license area, and you have now satisfied your performance requirement. That license is now yours up until at least the renewal date, and there will be a renewal expectation. So this point-to-point operations of one link is most likely going to be the easiest way to satisfy your build-out. Now, penalties. So if you miss the interim benchmark, that just accelerates your final benchmark by 1 year. So that means you have 4 years to meet your final build-out requirement rather than 5 years. The penalty for failing to meet the final build-out requirement is license revocation. As Dana mentioned, and Mariel will talk later, there's a lot of effort here to help licensees avoid missing their build-out requirement. Something we don't want anyone to do. And one thing that's worth stressing here is there's no financial liability. You certainly don't want to lose your license. This is a very valuable license, but there's no payment that you would owe anyone to the extent that that you weren't able to meet this build-out requirement. But as Mariel will talk about later, everyone's going to meet their build-out requirement. So can a license holder lease or sell the license after it's awarded? The answer for leasing is yes. you're permitted to lease all or a portion of your spectrum immediately after obtaining the license. And this is key here, this bullet right here. So if you're going to lease your license or frequencies within your license, you can contract with the party that you're leasing it to for them to have the obligation of meeting the performance requirement on the licensee's behalf. So if you are thinking about leasing some of this spectrum, you really want to be careful with what that leasing document looks like, and you want to ensure that it makes clear that the obligation to meet the performance requirement is now put on the lessee. And you want to also have some assurance that if the lessee fails to meet that build-out requirement, that they will have to financially compensate you, because what you don't want is for a lessee to either avoid meeting the performance requirement because it's not in their contract, or to then fail to meet that build-out requirement, and then you have no remedies available to you to obtain some type of payment from them. Sale is a little different. So you can only sell your license once you have met your performance requirement. So again, you can meet your performance requirement most likely through this point-to-point link that we've discussed. Once you have met your build-out requirement and filed the applicable documents with the FCC confirming that you have met this requirement, you now will be eligible to sell either your entire license or frequencies within your license. So you may decide you want to sell one of the channels that we talked about earlier before, but not all of them. You want to retain some. You can do that. So you can sell all or just a few of the frequencies. So question 7. Some of you may be wondering, how am I going to finance network construction and operations costs? So what I've done is I've just listed 5 of the most sort of popular federal funding programs here. I'm going to run through them quickly. These are not the only 5 federal funding programs that are available. In addition, there are going to be some state programs. There are going to be some private opportunities that folks will have. So I don't want to give anyone the impression that these are the only 5 opportunities out there, but these are some of the more common ones that you may have to help fund construction and operation. So the first is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. This program has not been adopted yet by the FCC. It was proposed back in August, but the expectation is that this program will be in effect, I believe, starting in 2021, I believe. It's a successor program to what is currently the Connect America Fund, which is one of the largest rural broadband federal support programs. So I think there's a lot of confidence that this program will be in effect.
They haven't announced when the auction will be. That was just the rulemaking, right?
Right, exactly. So the status, I'm sorry. So the status here is this program was just proposed in August 2019. We don't know what the final rules are going to look like yet, but the proposed budget is $2 billion per year over a 10-year period. The geographic area, this is a little tricky for folks. It's price cap areas, and of course, no one knows if they live in a price cap area or not. If you're interested in determining if you live in a price cap area, I've included a link here that is a little outdated, but it should be correct in most instances. It allows you to look up your geographic area and determine if you live in a price cap area. These funds will be awarded most likely. This is what the FCC has proposed. No final rules have been adopted yet. Through a reverse auction, so whoever can serve the most people at the lowest cost would receive preference through this reverse auction. And this program will support both your capital, so your construction costs, and then your ongoing operational expenses. And interestingly, and this is very interesting for folks here in this room, is the FCC's proposal here seeks comment on whether to award a tribal bidding credit for applicants who are proposing to provide service on tribal lands. So
So that tribal bidding credit goes to any service provider, non-tribal, that says it's serving tribal land.
So that's,
It's serving tribal land.
so that's,
I'm not going to get into the issues of that, but that's what it is, yeah.
that's the way it's,
And that's why this,
teed
that's
up.
why the tribes need to own this spectrum.
Right, right. But that's the way it's teed up right now. Another program.
Did Jeff pay you to say that?
No, I just do it.
But I have a thought on that coming up here. So another program that's available for some folks here, especially the Gila River and Maddie's and some of the other tribally owned telcos, is the Rate of Return High Cost program. This is for fixed residential and broadband service. Now, interestingly, this is a program that has been wildly successful in providing connectivity in rural areas. One thing to keep in mind here is if you're not living in a price cap area, then you're living in a rate of return area. So you would want to determine whether you're living in a price cap area or a rate of return area. In most instances, if you're living in a rate of return area, it would be hard to access this funding if you're not already doing so, as a general rule. But if you have questions about that, I'm happy to talk to you about that afterwards. A third program is the Community Connect grant program. This is a program that's run through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's authorized for $50 million annually through 2023. And it defines eligible areas as rural areas that lack any existing broadband speed of at least 10 megabits per second downstream. The application period, I believe, occurs in the first quarter of most calendar years, but don't quote me on that. But this is a program to look at to the extent you're looking for grant money. And this does require you to provide at least 15% of matching funds here to take advantage of this program. Another program that folks don't think about much in terms of meeting a build-out requirement for wireless licenses, but could be used in some circumstances, and it's very fact-specific, but is the ERate program. So the ERate program is a program that provides funding for connections to and within schools. It's a formula-based application. There's approximately $4 billion annually available through the ERate program, and right now applicants are not meeting that budget, so there is funding available. There's one key issue here, and you have to show that what you are, the service you're providing through the ERate program is the most cost-efficient service available. So you just want to be careful if you're going to use ERate funding to meet your build-out requirement. But that is a potential opportunity for some folks.
It might be hard to use E-rate funding to show the POPs coverage because E-rate funding is limited to service for schools. But it might help you with your point-to-point.
The point-to-point is what I was thinking.
Or it might even help you with your backhaul if you are building fiber to your school under E-rate. There are some rules that allow you to get excess capacity at your own incremental cost. It's very fact specific, but there are.
Very fact specific.
Yeah, and this guy, I know he knows it because.
and Irene and Jeff also are experts in this program. So they'll, yes.
So let's say you get a bid from an E-rate vendor to do a build out, but they're not able to deliver before the build out requirement ends. What can happen in that sort of context? And then also there's category 2 funding as part of E-rate for internal connections. It's something that we use outside of schools and libraries to build out a network.
Those are great questions. So I believe on the first question, which is whether an E-rate vendor was not able to deliver service by the time your performance build-out deadline occurred. Since those are two separate programs, under the rules at the FCC, you likely would be in violation of your build-out requirement. However,
or it could be done, but that E-rate money might not come in yet.
Right.
construction.
Yeah, so two thoughts on this. So one is you might be able to seek a waiver. Now, there's no guarantee that the FCC would grant that waiver, but under those facts, then potentially you could at least request for a waiver of the build-out deadline, given that a vendor had contracted to meet this build-out requirement for you and failed to do so. Another option would be to carefully include a provision in your contract with that vendor to ensure that they were put on notice that you are relying on them to help you meet your build-out requirement through their delivery of funds. So then you would have at least a remedy against that vendor if they did cost you your license.
One other thought, is if that point-to-point 2.5 gigahertz point-to-point circuit is just part of what they're going to build to bring service to the school, ensuring you've got that point-to-point up within your build-out requirements, even if they don't have the rest of their service available or even start billing for E-rate, you could get the point-to-point service up and meet your build-out requirement, even though you may not have the rest of your service operational. So there's some play there.
And that was my third answer, is just call Mary Ellen. She'll help you.
Yeah. Her other question though, your second question?
If you can use category 2 funding to.
No.
Provide some-
I can answer that.
Okay, perfect.
I can answer that now, because category 2 funding is for internal connections in the school. I can't see any relationship between that and can you see a relationship? Mariel, can you see a relationship between? Oh, Mariel always can. Can you see a relationship between category 2 funding and 2.5?
As I understand it, if you're connecting within the school system or maybe with the library, to have a point-to-point link between the build buildings that are far
A point to multi-point or point
You
to
can do a
point?
point-to-point. So for
Oh,
example,
within the campus.
Right.
but the campuses can be large.
Within the campus.
Then it would be a point-to-point. It satisfies that.
It would be a point to point, it would be within the campus, so it's category 2, not category 1. Who invited her? But that was
Yeah,
That
so
costs about $875, but I'm working on getting that ordered.
all of these are very fact specific, but if there's a will, there might be a way in some of these. And that's ultimately what I'm just trying to show here through these programs. And then, really finally, or really quickly, finally, the last program is the Lifeline program, which provides discounts on the cost of subscription for low-income households. This program is not going to help you with your network construction costs, but could help you with ongoing operational costs, because it drastically lowers, if not eliminates, the cost of service for low-income subscribers in your license area. It could be a valuable tool as you look at how do I put together a couple of these different funding sources to come up with a model that will work in terms of helping me both construct a network and then also keep it operational over the long term. And to the point we were discussing a couple of minutes ago on what the rules for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund are going to look like. Just keep in mind that policies change. So no one knows exactly what's going to come in the next few years. These licenses are going to be awarded, you will have at least 4 years to meet your build-out requirement. We don't know what the federal funding programs are going to look like in 2, 3, 4 years from now. Here's some examples. I think these are pretty high estimates in terms of the amount of money that's going to be put aside for tribal broadband. But the point ultimately I'm just trying to make is that policies change. So the programs that you're thinking about now to help you meet your performance requirements and fund your performance requirements, these programs could look differently once you have your license in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. And then of course, again, these were just federal funding programs. There's also state funding sources that are available in many states. And then there's private assistance through groups like Your Own Nest.
Thank you.
So that's it. If anyone has any questions, happy to answer them. If there are any questions online, I have no idea where I am time-wise, so apologies if I'm over.
You're good.
Okay.
That was great.
Okay, great.